Welcome to The Verdict. Tom Feher is an award-winning trial lawyer who knows there is more to our stories than what you see on the surface. He has built his law firm, Feher Law, into one of the top injury and employment trial firms representing people in California. Join us each week as Tom explores the successes, challenges, and lessons learned from some incredible people. Hit subscribe, follow Feher Law on Facebook and Instagram, and let's get to the verdict. And now, here is your host, Tom Feher.
Welcome to The Verdict, everybody. I'm Tom Feher, your host, and I can't wait for today's show. We've got another great guest. Today, we have Jonathan Goldhill, who's a highly experienced business coach and personal strategist. He specializes in guiding the next generation of leaders of family businesses, teaching them how to scale up their businesses and take control over the leadership and ownership of family businesses. Jonathan, thank you so much for being here today.
Tom, thanks for having me on the show today. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, there's so much that I want to get into, but I always like to sort of start from the beginning. I understand that you come from a family that had a business for generations, and I just want to get an idea. What was that like growing up in a family where you had a family business?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting. I think my story is, like everyone else's, pretty unique. It was my grandfather and his brothers who started the business with their dad. And then the next generation joined, but it didn't seem like too many of the next generation that were bloodline family joined. So my father, who was a stepson to them, joined the business. And had he lived past my age of 2, he died of a massive coronary when I was 2. Had he lived, then I probably would have had a very different experience because he would have been, someone I would have seen as he was on the road, he was traveling. He was a Yale Law School graduate, top of his class, decided he hated the practice of law, and the family business was a pretty appealing opportunity for him, and he became basically a account executive, traveling salesman. And so I didn't have that experience, Tom, of growing up in the family business. I had the experience of knowing that my family had a very successful business that employed everyone in the extended and could have employed everyone in the immediate family. But it seemed that the offspring on my grandfather's side, there was only one boy and he wasn't interested in the business. And then, the 2 son-in-laws joined the business. So it's kind of an interesting and different experience. I did go and visit them in their posh showroom. If you've ever been to like a fashion, we have it in downtown Los Angeles, you have the fashion building. But if you ever went into their showroom, you'd see like there was men's suits everywhere, and they had really swanky offices, and they went out for fancy lunches. But by that time, when I was a kid, they had already sold the business and they were operating as executives, like running the company, but had already pretty much apparently sold their interest out. So it's a very unique situation where they cashed out of the business and were given lifetime employment contracts. So, I grew up kind of being a spoiled rich kid. So I always thought. My mother said, "You're not spoiled, and we're not rich," and but we had a pretty fabulous life. And so I always felt a sort of I call it noblesse oblige. The obligation of the nobility to basically help and support and fight for the underclass. And so my sister married a labor union organizer. She became a lawyer herself, but was in the legal services field for all 30 or 40 years, whatever of her life, doing a lot of policy stuff. I was a community organizer. That's how I got my start before I started organizing businesses. So pretty interesting, when I'm sorry to keep going on like this, but
it's fascinating though. Just the contrast of you come from a family of business, but yet here we have community organization
right.
as part of your resume, right?
Yeah. No, I think my mother told me that she went to Wisconsin and was kind of like a leftist, it sounded like it, but hid her cashmere sweaters, which were pretty expensive, So there was always this kind of contradiction. And since your show is about telling stories, my story is one of basically recognizing at an early age that I had a lot of privilege and that we needed to fight for the disenfranchised, the people who didn't have the opportunities that we were given. And so most of my early career was doing that. I spent, like, even when I got out of business school, like I can get into my entrepreneurial experience, but when I got out of business school and I was 30, I joined an economic development firm. An economic development firm, as you can imagine, is doing business counseling, entrepreneurial training, business lending, but it's doing it in the disenfranchised communities, the poorer neighborhoods. So if you're familiar with Los Angeles, I mean, we opened our second office. I opened our second office in Pacoima. And Pacoima can be a rough area, but it's filled with a lot of industrial, large warehouse type facilities that employ local labor, unskilled, semi-skilled, most of whom were Mexican American, then other types of Latino, Latinx, and it was largely Black before all that, African American. So so it's an interesting career. I didn't really start fighting completely for myself until I got married, and that was like in my mid 30s. And I said, wow, like, oh my God, I have a kid, I've got bigger expenses, and I'm not this rich kid. I've got to really fight for my family, and I can still do good and do well. And that's kind of been my modus operandi over the last 30 years since I've been on my own. And since I started with the economic development firm, I've been consulting, coaching, training, financing small and medium-sized enterprises with a focus on family businesses, a focus on smaller companies. I tend to work with like the company that's got 10 to 50, 10 to 100 employees, not the large corporations. So that's my story.
Let me ask you, sorry to interrupt. You said so much, and there's so much I even want to touch on that you talked about, and this idea that when you're in a position of, I mean, you said nobility. I heard the different terms, but really, when you're in a position to help other people, it's something that you have to do. There's a responsibility there that exists. And I'm wondering, you had all these different opportunities and a very diverse background, eclectic background. Why is it, or what is it about family businesses that attracted you to this area to focus on that, as opposed to, this idea of working with big multinationals or something other than that?
Yeah, good question, Tom. So obviously, the 10 years that I spent with the economic development firm, which is right out of business school, which was what I felt was the official start of my consulting career. Economic development firms work with, well, at least in Los Angeles, they work with small and medium-sized businesses, not large companies. So to us, a large company back then was somebody doing $10 million. Like, that was like hugely successful. A lot of these people were startups, 500,000, $1 million dollars a year in business. And so most small businesses of that size are family businesses because their main economic unit that they're fighting for, like yourself, right? You're a startup and it's a husband and wife business. I mean, it may be Tom Feher who's the front of the house, but the back of the house, your wife is probably running, the office. And that's commonly what I found is I'd work with a lot of small business owners, and the typical thing was the sort of man started the business and there was a woman who was behind the scenes, and oftentimes they were doing the bookkeeping and the office and the office manager. Look, thankfully that stereotype is changing and more women are starting businesses, but I don't see too many men in situations where they're behind the scenes. But I did recognize, Tom, that most of my clients were family businesses. And then it was a few years ago where I decided to write a book, where it would squarely position me with family businesses, specifically what I call next generation leaders, or what I call disruptive successors, hence the book, Disruptive Successor, a guide to driving growth in your family business, because that's who my clients were. Most of them were family businesses.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring that up, because the same was for my father. He was a mechanic. He bought a piece of property on Melrose long time ago. And my mom was the one that was doing the bookkeeping. And just like you mentioned, our firm is 2.5 years old. I mean, I've been a lawyer for a long time, but my wife is my partner. She's the person that does a lot of the stuff that's not legal, but is super important.
Yeah.
And I feel like family businesses, it's something that has existed forever, right? And we're also entering sort of a different time or a different period where the 9 to 5 may not be the status quo anymore, and where you see more and more entrepreneurs and more businesses, starting with nothing, because you have access to all this technology, or you have access to these different mediums. So it's just a different era. Would you agree with that? That we're sort of entering a different type of era in terms of businesses and what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, the era that I think was a big shift, and I was part of it, was I guess we'd call it like the new media era, for lack of a more current term. And that's what I did when I left the economic development firm. I joined a new media technology company, and with my experience in organizing communities and events and trade shows, and because I'd been in that business, that's what we did. We organized 200 events. I think 80 we did in 1 year. And those 80 were at really cool places where people wanted to come hang out, and they were a cross between parties and like, hey, you're interested in going from the old economy to the new economy and getting a job. So I think that was what I would call like internet or web 1.0. And it started around 95. This business collapsed in March of 2000, when the stock market collapsed. Most of our sponsors and even a lot of our attendees went B2B and B2C, back to business and back to banking and back to consulting, which is what I ended up doing when our business crashed. But like technology firms, and I've worked for many, they're like, obviously, like they're the darlings, or were the darlings of Wall Street.
Right.
They're still probably they are the future companies that people want to start, unicorn companies that are going to be, billion-dollar valuations. But that's not like the reality. Most job creation in this country is created by middle market firms, and most businesses are 10 or fewer employees. One of my mentors, Vern Harnish, says that there's like, oh gosh, I forget how many businesses are forming every single day. Most of them are one-person firms, and they're one people too many. So so like they should really go and work for somebody else. But the mid-market is where the real job creation, because those are the ones that then become the unicorns. But they're few and far between. So yeah.
I love that, though, this idea that the mid-market is a huge job creator, and you have such a great opportunity to have businesses that mean something to communities when you're talking about family businesses and making sure that they're successful. I mean, there's a difference between the coffee shop that's in your neighborhood and the people there, versus the Starbucks that's on every corner, and this idea of the mom and pop shop. But there is that sort of there in between the mom and pop, right, and the Starbucks.
Yeah.
And what is it? I mean, for those types of businesses, what would you say is sort of, or some of the most important things that they can do in order to grow, in order to scale up, and to really be that job creator within their communities?
Yeah, so I think if you want to dominate your industry, your region, your local market, your village, whatever it is, you have to have some very clearly differentiating strategies for your business, whatever that looks like. There's a dentist that's pretty famous down under in Australia, and he's turned his dental office into a place where you go and you get espresso and you hang out and so it's very different. I think the problem, as we think about coffee shops, the problem with a lot with a lot of small coffee shops is the coffee's not that good, and then you get some coffee shops that are really good. So it's very hit and miss. So I think sort of what I will call the McDonald's syndrome, or the Starbucks syndrome, is if people want a consistent tasting cup of coffee, no matter where they are, and then if they get into this, I want a double cappuccino with a half cap, this, whatever, they know they can get that at Starbucks anywhere. You can't get that in any local coffee shop, and a local coffee shop might be good or might not be good coffee. So the coffee shops that are local, that are differentiating and doing really well, they've got let's say their strategy is, hey, we get the best beans, better than Starbucks. Starbucks beans, they'll tell you that they're sourcing great beans, but the reality might be is that these people are sourcing even better, more gourmet beans. So the key words here are differentiating strategy, something that you can dominate your market with, that sets you apart, that clearly gives you a value proposition that solves either a pain or a frustration that most other businesses are ignoring, not solving. During this recording so far, I've gotten 2 calls from Blue Shield, and I'll do a shout out, a negative shout out about Blue Shield, because I think I went kind of postal on them yesterday, because there's a medication that I've been taking, cholesterol lowering medication that I've been taking for 15 years, with my family heart history. It makes sense. And they'll only give me a 30-day supply. So every 30 days I'm calling up, and then having to go remind the pharmacy and then having to go pick it up. I mean, what a waste of my time.
Totally.
And that's a customer disservice. You'd think that a company like Blue Shield could figure it out, but they've put such barriers in place with their prior authorizations that, any company that can figure out how to do healthcare differently, and maybe Oscar is that company. I don't know them well enough, but any company that can figure out how to break up the monopolistic practices of these Blue Shields and Blue Crosses, there's a huge opportunity out there, because they are an enormous pain point for a lot of people. I can't be the only person who's pissed off when I get a 24%, annual premium increase. I mean, that was going on during my 40s. Every year, I was like, what? Another 24%? 22%? What?
It's crazy.
So, it's really crazy. So I think that, you've got to look at, if you want to create a differentiating strategy, you have to look at what is everyone else is doing. And if everyone is zigging, then you might need to zag. If everyone is delivering something a certain way, you might need to deliver it a different way. And you've got to look at, what is it that's going to differentiate you? Is it the actual product or service? So the product would be like the coffee, the beans. Is it the service, the large corporation who wants to do a 9-question evaluation after each, hey, install some better systems to manage and supervise your people. Don't make me give you a feedback on every single call that I had with your company. Don't waste my time. It's disrespectful. And so either have something that's differentiating in your service, your product, or your delivery distribution model. And that's where, getting back to these technology companies, they've disrupted the marketplace because they deliver things through an online e-commerce platform. Amazon, as an example, has been a game changer. And, a lot of people may hate the company because they're like Walmart. They crushed the small business people. But like Amazon, I think, is trying to support small businesses by creating storefronts for those people.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, you got to differentiate. So it's a long-winded answer, and
No,
not too detailed, like in terms of how I would take someone through a process about figuring out your differentiating strategy.
well, I think I love the way you started though. The dentist in Australia who's serving espresso there. You definitely need to get your teeth whitened or cleaned after that. But it's but there's definitely something there, and there's a nuance to it.
Yeah.
And I look at, for example, just the legal industry, and I think how important it is to provide awesome service. I mean, like Ritz-Carlton type of service. And you were just talking about how upset you were with dealing with your insurance company. But imagine if it was easy. I mean, imagine
Right.
if all you had to do was click a button and
Right.
there it was. Right. So there is so much, sometimes doing something different. It isn't necessarily in the product per se, but it's just in the service, in the manner that it's being delivered.
Yep.
For people, so that, all right, our time is so short as it is on this planet. You don't want to spend, I don't know what the statistics are for how much time we spend, on the phone with customer service. So it's one of the last things we want to do. And you touched on something else that I think is really important. This idea about systems. And I know you said, why put it always on the consumer? You've got to do your own homework and figure out what systems work for you. When you're coaching businesses or coaching people within businesses and offering them strategies, and you see a business where we're working so hard, but we feel like we're getting nowhere, or things aren't just they don't seem to be working, things are falling through the cracks. How do you get them to focus on systems and what systems they should have in place so that their business is running optimally?
Okay, so the question is how do I get people to focus on systems so their business is running optimally when things are falling through the cracks?
Yeah.
So it's exactly like that. I asked them, like, I would ask them, how much longer can you deal with things falling through the crack before you start pulling all your hair out? Because it is aggravating. And if once people have gotten to a point of frustration, then they're willing to see things and do things differently. And then I try and give them a tool, the use of which will not only change their thinking, but change their behavior and change the behavior of everyone in the company. So let's see if I can think of an example. I mean, I can think of a teaching example. I'm trying to think of something that's concrete, and nothing's coming to me at the moment, but let's just take this simple solution, this simple issue of the phones ringing in your company. Now everyone has figured out that what seems like a great solution is, let's go to an auto attendant, that drives people to a voicemail, and all the big corporations, use this, and then it, that seems to be a great system. But is that really a good system for a company that wants to be high touch? So that would be frustrating if you're losing customers, or hold times or wait times are really long. So different systems or things might be, let's figure out how to measure and reduce hold times and wait times. Let's figure out a system to measure how many times people have to be transferred to someone else before they are actually serviced. Let's see if there's a way that we could maybe even have the phone answered, like on the first, second, or third ring, and have it answered by a human. And then let's see if we could actually come up with a script that would actually make people feel good about calling us. I think about one of my early clients that was in the nurse staffing industry.
Mm-hmm.
And they would answer the phone something to the effect of, hi, how can we make your day an excellent day today? And it would make, as it just made you, it would make you smile, and it would make you feel good, So like when I went irate on the Blue Shield person yesterday, I realized, look, this person has absolutely no responsibility except that they're kind of a pawn in this, game that the whole company is participating in. And so I said it with a smile and a laugh. And I said, can we just start this phone call? And can I just tell you how much I absolutely cannot stand doing business with your company? And and how I hope that this is being recorded and listened to by your managers, because they should know how much your customer service stinks.
Yeah.
Like, and I said it with a smile, and I could tell she was smiling and laughing on the other end of the line, but it was really hard for her to get away from the script. So, yeah, I think I don't even know what the question was anymore, Tom. But right, like, this is about, again, back doing things differently and about.
Well, I was going to say, clearly, this experience from yesterday has not left you.
No.
And I think this should just be a important point. This is how much customer service matters in whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
And Maya Angelou has a quote that I'll probably butcher, but people don't remember, what you did for them, but they remember how you made them feel, right?
Yes, that's true. It's like people remember not the content so much, but the intent behind what the content was, the emotion, the feeling. So true. Yep.
Yeah. And some of these newer companies, though, I think that's something that they're priding themselves on. I mean, I love black t-shirts. I wear them almost all the time. And my order just kept lagging and lagging. And it was no fuss. They're just like, we're sending you another one. Keep the one if it ever shows up.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Right. That's how you've got to figure out where people's pain point and frustration is. Now, the problem is, and let's move off of Blue Shield with this final comment. The problem is when you're monopolistic. What's that?
I was like, I think we might be plugging them in a way.
Yeah.
By talking about them so much.
Yeah. But when you're a monopoly or an oligopoly or whatever they really are, it's really, they make the rules. It's very difficult to disrupt a large industry like that. And so this is where the greatest entrepreneurial opportunities is where industries where there's the most amount of dissatisfied consumers, and you can figure out a disruptive delivery mechanism or substitute product or service.
Yeah. And that, the title of your book, Disruptive Success or Disruptive Successor.
Right.
Tell us just a little bit about that book, sort of what's the thrust of it?
Yeah. So the book is really most of the book is a playbook, framework, if you will, to follow if you want to drive growth in your entrepreneurial company. Now, I happen to frame the book around family businesses, and I visit one particular family that I've been working with for 7 years, who have grown from 10 or 15 employees to I think they're pushing 120, 130 today, 7 years later. And so it's significant growth. It's not enormous growth, right? It's not like but I mean, that's 10x growth. It's just over 7 years. So the book is designed for people to understand that if they're in a family business and they're what I call a next generation leader, typically 25 years old to 40 years old, and taking over or looking at taking over the family business, they're going to have to disrupt the status quo. They're going to have to do a deep dive strategy look at their service or product, their delivery, their distribution, obviously the technology platforms that they're using. I mean, we talk about tech stacks, of things that we build our businesses on. The prior generation of businesses were not built on technology stacks. So these are like, if you're not getting current with that, that's a minimum of how you need to disrupt the management of your business. But you also need to be constantly looking at, how do I grow? How do I improve? How do I scale this thing? And you're not going to be able to do it with just the basic the basis, I call them like the entry tickets. It's like everyone can get tickets to the upper decks at Dodger Stadium, right? The general admission seats, and so quality, service, price, those three, like that's the basic. Like those are general admission, upper field level seats. They don't differentiate your business to say that we offer the best quality, or we offer the best service, or we offer the best price. I mean, you have to have stuff that's much deeper. If you're the best price, then you better have some kind of a price guarantee, right?
Right.
Like, if you're the best service, then you better have some kind of kept promise indicators or key performance indicators that you track that demonstrate that you're the best. So it's back to that differentiating conversation again.
Yeah, I'll say in law, I feel like, this idea of running your firm like a business is new to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And is one of the reasons why a lot of attorneys struggle, because they're great attorneys, and they're focusing so much on practicing law, which is obviously so important, and taking care of clients. But in doing so, they're not taking care of the business.
Right.
And at the end of the day, you have to be able to work on the business as well, not only in the business. And I see a common question is, to what degree does somebody scale, right? Some people are like, oh, it's a huge headache once we have all of this overhead, versus, when I was just by myself or with one other person, it was a lot easier to manage. My question is, how does a business, especially family businesses, how do they determine or come to terms with how big do we want to be? How much do we want to scale? When is it ruining my quality of life, or how do you even maintain a quality of life while you're scaling? I know there's a lot there to unpack.
Yep.
But
let's try and unpack it, because there's a lot there. Let's go start with the family, and then I'm going to go back to the law firm example, if I can.
Please.
So in a family business, it's very common that not all family members are on the same page or aligned around the growth. I've seen family businesses where one person is really wanting to drive the business and another family member is not, and just wants to be kind of a role player. So they have to sort of negotiate, if you will, their values, their purpose, their vision, so that both needs are being somewhat accommodated to. I have a client who's grown very nicely over the years, and there's the father who started the business. It never had that kind of vision of growth, and once he had the confidence that his sons could really run the business, he continuously slowly let go of the reins. And then one son wanted more growth than the other. So I think that, again, when the confidence from the father and the other son, when their confidence increased and they saw, our brother, our son is really doing a great job in this leadership role, and we really can trust him as a leader. So this is now a general statement about leadership. When you can really trust the leader in charge to set the vision, when you're excited about the vision and the purpose and where you're going and what the company is all about, like, you will follow that leader. But it takes a lot for a leader to get followers, right? You don't just get it vested because you're the president. Doesn't mean that people lead you. It comes not from authority or position, but from something genuine that's hard to define, where people trust you. So now let's go back to the law firm situation, where I believe that professional services firms are among the most difficult to scale. And by professional service firms, I'm referring to consulting firms, accounting firms, law firms, and the like. Now, the reason why is because there's not that much of an economy of scale that's gotten by the larger law firm. An economy of scale comes from maybe having back office processes. Look, there's some things, right? You guys, as a small law firm, you have to get access to good data. You have to subscribe to probably some pretty expensive legal programs or services that give you information, case law, whatever it is. I'm not sure.
Sure.
It's easier when a large law firm buys a license and spreads it across 50 people, just like health insurance. It's easier to get health insurance and get good rates for a larger firm than a smaller firm, because you don't, it's hard to buy into those group policies. So smaller firms, the larger firms, I think, struggle to keep people who want autonomy and independence. And they do well with people who feel like they're being supported. The challenge in other professional service firms like consulting firms is everyone wants to make a great income. And so as soon as you start working for a bigger firm, you have to slash your income in half, because half of the money's got to go pay for training and development of the rest of the people and other types of infrastructure. So these are difficult firms, I think, for most professional service firms to scale. It works better, it seems to me, in the accounting, where you've got more levels of workers, and they need to get their certified public accounting degree or certification, and they get that while working at the firm. And there's a lot of support and knowledge, and it's not easy to be a really good independent accountant that can work on bigger clients and get steady billings. It's just some of my thoughts. You can probably pick those apart and pick holes in them.
No, sure. I can't help but, when you were describing the story of the father and the sons, and the father didn't have this vision of how big the company was going to be. When you were talking about that, there's something really beautiful about that story, and it had to do with this development of trust and this growth in their relationship. And I can just envision, being a father and having a son and trusting him, or a daughter, and trusting them to take over something, or to disrupt, or to create something, and watching that. And at the same time, not only is this relationship developing, but the person, that's a part of you, your offspring, right? Your daughter, your son, they're growing and they're reaching their potential and doing great things. And so there can be so much beauty in a family business, in the amount of things that one can create and do. And you can have these really positive relationships where, rather than maybe some of the dramas we see on TV, where everyone's vying for power and power plays and positioning themselves that way.
Yes. Succession is a pretty hideous example of a ruling class Rupert Murdoch type family. And I think it's based on Murdoch's or the Redstone family, where people are vying for power. But trust is a really difficult thing. I could probably come up with some behavioral definitions of what ingredients would go into building trust, and you might say, yeah, that's great, but trust is like beauty. It's difficult to define. But you know it when you have it or see it. One of my mentors used to say, leadership is like beauty, difficult to define, but you know it when you see it. And I can tell when an entrepreneur or CEO is a leader in their business, or when they're not. And this is a difficult thing. I have a client that is a very visionary entrepreneur, and he's in a field, real estate, where there's a tremendous focus on making money and buying buildings and selling assets, and it's very monetarily focused, as opposed to a nonprofit, which is a very value laden focus. And what I observe and what he's been experiencing is that some of his employees, his key people, are out like double dipping. They're doing side jobs, side hustles, side businesses. They're cutting deals, where they're making money, even leveraging off of the company. And part of it is because the leader himself of the business is so absently involved, and he's focused on his family's welfare and family benefit. And while he talks a good game, and I think he does really care about his people, and he's very loyal to his people. He's very economically and monetarily driven. And so the culture is such that everyone's figuring out like, well, how can I get ahead? How can I make a lot of money? And the people that don't have that are the people that stick around and are part of the company. But it's been difficult to build a different culture organization.
It's really interesting how the behavior of the leader of this company, and it probably translates to other companies as well, that trickles down, and that you have a culture that develops based on the leadership within an organization or a company, small business or otherwise.
Yeah, I think that, it all starts with the top. I used to say way before I got into business and I was just a regular guy with a pet. I always said like the dogs always resemble like what the owners look like. If the owners look unhappy, like the pets look, or the pets look unhappy, the owners look unhappy. Or, if the pets are like too free spirited, the owner is too free spirited. And yeah. Oh, by the way, I have a pretty free spirited, I think a pretty happy looking dog actually. And maybe it's because I'm attracted to those breeds because they make me feel. But I mean, I think that I use that as a metaphor for leaders. How you show up as a leader in your business is going to be how your people show up as well. So if you don't like the behavior that's going on, if you're unhappy with how people are doing things, look first at yourself and how you're showing up. What are you modeling? What are you, look, what behavior are you modeling that they might be copying? And oftentimes I find that leaders, they have a huge blind spot and they don't see the behavior that they're modeling and why it's being replicated. And it may look different in a different form, but it is based on the head person.
That's a real powerful message and a powerful point. When we gripe about, or when leaders or the leader of a firm or a business gripe about the employees or their work product, one of the first places to look, I love that, is just look at yourself. Start there at the very least.
Yeah. Keep in mind that the fish stinks from the head down. And if if you think, well, I'm the head, then if you don't like the way your business is going, if you don't like the results that you're getting from your employees, look at yourself first. And if you have trouble looking at yourself, I think it's a difficult thing for us to be, to sort of face reality and know thyself. That's why I think people hire coaches like myself, is to help them to see their true situation, their true behavior, and the results that they're getting from their situation and their behavior. Check it out. You have a big part in this. Until you own it and take responsibility, nothing's going to change. It's going to be the same.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. And I know you've got a couple books behind you, and we briefly talked about that sort of off the air. And I'm wondering, obviously they're up there. How has some of the literature that you've just studied over your time, how has that influenced the way that you coach and strategize with businesses?
Yeah, I think there are a few books that probably all people should read, or I should say a few authors, and they tend to be the favorite authors. So if it's around strategy, Jim Collins is the guy. Let's first pay homage to Peter Drucker, who is too difficult for most of us to read, but Drucker covered everything. He was the first real management guru. But But so strategy, Jim Collins, if you're dealing with like team building and dysfunction and you want like a healthy team, it's Pat Lencioni. He's the guy. And if you're talking about like methodologies to try and scale and grow your company, I think what Gino Wickman has put together with Traction, which was, I think, largely a derivative work of Vern Harnish and the Gazelles organization scaling up, but he made it more simpler and or simpler, be redundant, and more accessible is what I was going to say.
Yeah.
And so I give him a lot of credit. And then there's just probably a lot of other books that have influenced me over the years. If you want to build a valuable business, I think John Warlow has been pretty influential for me in his books on based on the value builder system. And like the godfather of a lot of these books for small business owners, who I didn't respect at all when I went and got my MBA, because that was MBA stuff is highbrow and this was low, this is small business. But Michael Gerber, who wrote, and most people have read, The E-Myth or E-Myth Revisited. I mean, this is basically a book about working on, not in, your business, and recognizing that a business is a set of systems, and you need to start to recognize the systems, and then you'd have to figure out where your zone of genius or brilliance is, and focus on that, putting yourself in that zone as much as possible, and letting other people do the other parts of the business.
Right. I think it's an important thing to find out not only what you're good at or your zone of genius, but also what you enjoy doing as well, and trying to marry those two aspects.
Very much so. Yeah. So
we talked about leadership, and the leader isn't necessarily defined by a title. Clearly, that's just because you say you're CEO or whatever you may be, or the leader in your group, you may not end up being that person, or people may not follow you. What are some of the key traits that you've seen that leaders exemplify in the businesses that you've worked with?
Yeah. Wow. This is a great question, and my answer changes like so frequently. There are a few common things that I probably come back to, but so one is the ability to be visionary, and what I mean, but really by that is the ability to tell or share in a storybook fashion, like, where are we going? What are we about? The ability to create chemistry and connection with their people. So to be a great leader, I think you have to be incredibly compassionate, and you have to be humble. To be compassionate requires you to be a great listener. To be a great leader and to understand what leadership is about, you don't just become it. You aren't just it. You aren't born it. You have to become it. And to do that, I think you have to be a learner, and that typically means being a reader or a watcher of videos. You have to be able to communicate passion, and so I think of like the guy that I think owns this space, and going back to books, is John Maxwell. My favorite book was The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. I think many of his books, I should say, because I haven't read more than just a couple of them, have been variations on that best-selling book. But here was a guy who was a pastor who became a motivational speaker, leadership coach, creator of leadership certification and programs. And he talks about these 21 different qualities, I think, that a leader embraces. I think also, you have to know who you are. You have to know yourself. Like, what are your leadership strengths, and what are your leadership deficiencies? And there's a guy named Flippin who wrote a book called The Flip Side, and he's a PhD, and his book, The Flip Side, is about 10 different personality styles or traits. And I really like them. I used them years ago to help you identify what your blind spots are. Do you do, some of his things that he talks about are like, do you have an ostrich approach to leadership or management, where you stick your head in the sand so that when you pick your head up, it's like, is the coast clear? Is it all gone? Like, is it fixed? And then there's the bulldozer, and that's, I sense there's a problem over in that department. I'm just going to clean house. Let's get rid of, go over there and just get rid of everyone. you know. Um, then there's like the marshmallow, which is sort of like, they're too soft. They just like, they're too accepting of everything. And so, you know, there are all these different approaches and frameworks again. And Jim Collins in his book, I think it was Good to Great, talks about level 5 leaders. And those are leaders who are leaders with humility, and listen, because the charismatic leader is only going to get you so far. As soon as you feel like you've lost trust in the direction that they're going, they'll run over you and go in another direction. So those are a few of the traits. I really ought to have probably a short list and stick to my 7 C's of leadership or something like that. But I'm never great with those types of things. And
there's so much just great content in what you just said, because I remember reading John Maxwell's book in law school, and then I reread it after law school, and I would write down like where I was, and I was like, oh, I'm a terrible leader right now. I'm really low on the rung of things. When I was filling out the questionnaire, I was like, I have a lot of room of improvement and I still do. It's a work in progress. And just this idea that you hit on is compassion or empathy. I usually refer to it as empathy, but I think that's just critical in everyday life. And especially as a trial lawyer, that's how we connect with people. So it's so important. The things that you said. Now,
by the way, competence also. I'm thinking of another C, like, because I'm thinking competence, character, compassion, like competence. Like, if you are not doing your job well, which is setting the vision, telling the story, like getting people involved, challenging people, like if you're not competent, no one's going to follow you.
100%. Right. The results actually, at the end of the day, they do matter too.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah. And, I think you also have to walk the walk, talk the talk. Yeah. You said it, you have to lead by example, right? It's really difficult, I think, if you're going to be a leader, to show up at, into the office at 10:30 and then, leave at 5:30, or, you're gone a ton, and then you're not connecting with your people. You've got to connect with them. You've got to touch them.
Yeah. All great points. And that becomes much more difficult as you grow or continue to scale, and you have to find ways of doing that and being involved in the people, your team's life. Especially if you're all trying to work towards this common goal and all trying to buy into, as you talked about, the vision, like where are we going? What's the purpose of all of this, right? And if you don't have that, there's really a loss of motivation to do those things.
Yeah. It's a couple of thoughts. One is, Pat Lencioni starts his book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, with like an opening statement. And it says something to the effect of, it's not finance, it's not technology, it's not strategy, but it's the team that gives you the ultimate competitive advantage. And I think that my work with my clients is about helping them to build better teams so that they can build a successful business, because it is the ultimate competitive advantage, and so they can get more time back for themselves and enjoy the journey as they're hopefully scaling up, growing, or whatever, because that's ultimately, I think, what they want. Is most entrepreneurs, business owners, they want freedom, and they want fortune, and they want fun, fulfillment. So you get that by building a great team, and you get a great team by being a great leader. So if you really want to have a lifestyle that you absolutely desire, then figure out how to be a better leader in your own life. I mean, that's what I learned in my own business, because I never saw myself as a leader. I was always the number two guy in all the companies I worked with. There was always what I call the leading blocker, and I was the guy who did all the maintenance, the cleanup. I was the taskmaster. I mean, I go back to my childhood. This is who I was. I was a guy who mastered tasks and got stuff done. But once I started working on my own, which was 22 years ago, I had to learn how to lead. And I don't know that the coaches, I worked with a lot of coaches. I don't know that the coaches gave me books to read that said, okay, this is how you're going to learn to lead. Like, it wasn't about leading a whole lot of people. It's about just leading myself. It's about learning how to manage my time and my priorities, and learning how to do some goal setting that I hadn't done before, figuring out how to manage work-life balance, how to integrate that. um, you know and there's very few books that I'm aware of that talk about how to be a really successful lifestyle entrepreneur, how to build a business out of your bedroom that works for you and makes you, gives you a lot of fulfillment. um, so you've got, it's trial and error. It was for me.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? I'm curious about the challenges that you faced just in your early years and
Yeah.
throughout your career that have really, taught you the lessons that you're able to share with so many others now.
Okay. So I could go in a lot of different directions, but I'll tell you what comes to mind first off. And it comes to mind because I had a meeting yesterday with someone who I'll call my therapist. He is and was, and many years I had difficulty dealing with uh, a challenging child, and also going through a divorce. Um, so here's something that I was really struggling with during my early years of being on my own. And I think this was going on, by the way, in my, let's call it corporate, but when I worked in small businesses and I was, working with 10, 20, 30 employees,
Yeah.
I noticed that I didn't consistently manage my moods. Um, and so on Mondays and Fridays, as an example, I wouldn't really feel like developing new business or doing what I needed to do to build the business. My good days would be Wednesday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, maybe.
Yeah.
But I noticed that I rode a little bit of a roller coaster, and it was hard, really difficult for me to string 5 really good days together week after week, and then also, have a great, like, really fulfilling weekend. So I noticed that on average during the first few years of my coaching, that I'd have 3 or 4 okay days, and 3 or 4 days a week that were not so great. Now that is obviously not going to be productive and successful. And so I think that there's a ton of things that one can do, and some things that I did do. Um, I mean, things that have helped me are things like yoga and meditation and regular exercise. Like, those have, like, but that's always been part of my discipline. Eating healthy, that's always been sort of part of my discipline. So, I think I was still struggling with, like, why do I feel like I'm not consistently always great? And I would look at guys who were just a few years older than me, people that everyone knows, like Tony Robbins, who I promoted and did some stuff, like organized some of his workshops when I was and he was in our early 20s. And I thought, like, how does Tony always seem to create this, like, he's like up and on all the time? And so I actually went to a psychiatrist and said, you know, I just don't know what it is. I feel like I'm suffering from something. It's been going on for decades. Maybe it's the loss of my father at the age of 2, and it's a lack of confidence. Can you help me figure it out? And he
Yeah.
was different than other psychiatrists. He actually had me do what's called a buccal swab test, where I actually did a saliva test,
Interesting.
and it actually looked at what medications would be good for someone with my chemistry. And I'm talking about SSRIs. I'm talking about antidepressants because I had tried a few of them and I was like, God, these are awful. After 3 days, to be like, get me off this stuff. And so he identified from this test that I was missing. There are two twisted pairs of L-methylfolate in our body, and I was missing one. And one of them, like to miss one, could explain that I might be a little bit lumpy in my ups and downs and couldn't consistently sustain an excellent state of mental health. And I mean, by the way, none of this would probably be observable to anyone outside of me. But I was paying attention to hey, did I have a good day? Did I not have a good day?
Yeah.
And so once I got on this L-methylfolate, which was like a little thing that changed my biochemistry. Now, I understand from the psychiatrist that I've talked to more recently that typically someone would take that and then take an antidepressant. But once I started taking that supplement, it's literally like a B vitamin, like everything changed. I can't remember having those up and down days anymore. I have forgotten about that. Was in my in year 2000 through 2005, where it was really hard. I couldn't keep calling and hiring coaches to help me elevate my mood. I never have that kind of a cycle anymore. And so the reason why I'm sharing this story and I think being a little bit vulnerable is only to make the point that we are made up of, we have a biochemistry. And if your biochemistry is not at an optimal level, then you might be struggling with some of these things. I mean, subsequently, I got into getting my blood tests done on a quarterly basis to check my levels, because they would say, there's a hormone level or a growth hormone or that is low, and let's get you into the range where you're supposed to be. And since I've dialed all that stuff in, I mean, I have a pretty fabulous mental disposition. I still have challenges like everyone else does, but it's not a struggle like it was in the early years. So I, there are a lot of people who would be like, what? I'm not going to take that. But look, there are people who are struggling with bipolar illness. And if they're not on like lithium or some other medication that's going to help them, whatever that is, Seroquel, whatever it is, you're going into you're not playing with a full deck, or that's like going into a gunfight with a knife. You're not going to win this war. You've got to address these things. And so these are not things just for the rich and famous. These are things that everyone has some access to, but and of course you have to do the other things too, the physical things that are going to help build your self-esteem, but you're not going to just build it up through affirmations and yoga and meditation or whatever your martial arts, whatever your thing of choice is. You've got to look at your whole person and figure out how can you be the best leader of your life and live a legendary life, as my colleague Tommy Breedlove says. How do you be and live a legendary life? First, you have to put on your oxygen mask before you take care of other people.
Yeah, that's powerful stuff. That's real powerful stuff. Because there are a lot of people out there, and it could be anything from vitamins, it could be food, it can be hormones, whatever it is. But if we're not checking our physical and our mental state, if we're not, it's just like with your car, right? If you're not checking the oil or if you're not checking the tire pressure, you're not making sure that everything's working, you're not going to be able to be the best version of yourself. And there are foods that change our moods, right? And you're eating these things and you feel a certain way, and that doesn't put you on your A game. I mean, there's so much out there, and so much that we don't know still, right? And I think we're going to see a huge change probably in the next decade or 2 decades of like personalized sort of healthcare and really getting to know our bodies even more. I mean, there's so much out there that we don't know, and why we feel a certain way at a certain time. And then we may beat ourselves up about it, right? Like, why am I not doing what I'm, and it could have nothing to do with you or your effort, right? And I think that's just such an important thing for people to take inventory of. So I'm really glad that you shared that with our listeners, because it's important. And some of us, right? There's a lot of people out there that are like, I'm never, I don't want to know what's going on. I'm not going to the doctor. I'm not doing checkups or
Correct.
whatever it is. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, wait a minute. If you're really trying to be on your A game and really trying to be the best version of yourself, you got to be honest with yourself, right?
Yep. Yeah. I could, as they say in TV, jump the shark here and, look at something that's completely out of the box that we've been talking about. But I've had some people come to me and they were kind of intrigued with my coaching. And I'm thinking many years ago. And they didn't have those set of problems that we've just been talking about that are very internal. All of their problems were external. So they believed. And so they would say, it's like the old expression, it's the economy, stupid. Or I heard once someone in my workshop said, why should I train people to be better workers when all they're going to do is just leave me and then form their own firms? Or I've had people, I wouldn't even consider working with these people, but they've said, you know what? It's the government. It's the state of California. It's the policies. It's the everything is outside of their control. I mean, let's be realistic. Like, I'm a guy who did a lot of like community organizer and tried to change the world, but it's not that easy to get large bureaucracies to change, whether it's healthcare institutions or the state of California and their policies or the US government or whatever. But stop blaming a set of external circumstances for your challenges, and stop blaming other people like they're going to leave and go work for some other company. Like, yeah, like it's impossible. Or the common complaint I might hear today is, well, it's really too hard to find people. And I understand that in the service economy, look, there's some reality to this great resignation and people not coming back and service employees. But like, have you tried absolutely everything possible? Have you created the kind of company that people will want to flock to, as opposed to, I'll pass on them. There's another company down the street that seems to be more interesting, better program, better benefits, better challenging. So the only way that you're going to be able to be your best self is to figure out what are all these obstacles, blockages, and start to recognize which ones you have control over, or, and what maybe your blind spots might be, and start working to remove those blind spots. And I guarantee you, you will be a more interesting person as a result. And you'll be more interested in other people, and people will follow you. And, that's what we're talking about here.
I love that. And on that note, what I want to do is give our listeners an opportunity. If they want to reach out to you or find you, what's the best way that they can learn more about you, get in contact with you? Let us know.
Yeah. So I'm guessing that your listeners are podcast listeners. So you probably want to check my podcast out. You can find that at the Goldhill Group /podcast. And that is my Disruptive Successor podcast. All the episodes are posted on the website, thegoldhillgroup.com. If you think you'd make an interesting speaker, then, request to guest and fill out that form. But that's probably the best way, is on my website, thegoldhillgroup.com.
Awesome. It was so good getting a chance to connect with you, Jonathan. Just so much gold here.
in them hills.
Yeah, right. So I really appreciate it. Thanks again for stopping by on The Verdict and chatting with us.
Tom, thanks so much for having me.
All right. Take care.
This show has been produced by Market Domination, LLC. To discover how you can have your own show completely done for you and turn it into a real published book and become the authority in your marketplace, go to www.marketdominationllc.com/podcast offer.